Part 1. The sky over what used to be Chicago was dark, not with night, but with smoke and drifting ash. The sun struggled to push through the thick haze, casting the ruins below in a dull, sickly orange glow. Once this place had pulsed with life, cars honking, people laughing, skyscrapers glittering under a clear blue sky. Now, only silence remained, broken occasionally by the groan of collapsing steel or the distant crackle of dying fires. High above the wreckage, suspended in the cold void just beyond Earth's atmosphere, the Cathari command vessel Jarvok hung like a predator waiting to confirm its kill. Inside its obsidian bridge, High Commander Vrak stood motionless, his armored claws resting on the edge of a glowing tactical display. His scales shimmered a deep violet, the color of victory in his culture. For 3 long cycles, his fleets had bombarded this world. City after city had fallen, resistance had crumbled, and now Earth was quiet. Vrak allowed himself a slow, satisfied breath. Humanity, those loud, chaotic, unpredictable mammals, was finally gone. Their ships had been shattered in the belt. Their orbital defenses melted into slag. Their leaders silenced. The Cathari Dominion had swept through the Sol system like a cleansing fire. And Earth, the heart of human defiance, was now a tomb. Scans show no active power signatures above 5 megawatts, reported Sub-Commander Trell from the sensor pit below. No comms? No movement. Atmosphere is toxic in most zones. Surface temperature unstable. Vrak nodded. Good, prepare the final report. Tell the Conclave that Sol is pacified. The human threat is extinguished. Just as he turned to leave the bridge, a sharp beep cut through the low hum of the ship. Trell stiffened. Commander, we're receiving a signal. Vrak paused. From where? Antarctica. Deep subglacial layer. Encrypted. Human origin. A ripple of unease passed through the bridge. Antarctica had been scanned repeatedly. Nothing of value remained there, just ice, old research stations, and silence. Yet the signal was real, strong, and repeating. Play it, Vrak ordered. The speakers crackled, then cleared. A voice, human male, calm but edged with something hard, filled the chamber. You'll regret this fight, that was all. No plea, no surrender. No begging for mercy, just those 5 words delivered like a promise. Vrak's tail twitched. His eyes narrowed. This was not the tone of a defeated species. It sounded like a warning. Trace the source, he said, his voice low. Already done, Commander. It's coming from a structure buried under 2 kilometers of ice near the old Amundsen Scott station. Designation unknown. Shielding is heavy, probably layered with lead and ferrocrete. We missed it during orbital sweeps. Vrak stared at the holographic globe of Earth rotating slowly before him. Antarctica glowed faintly, a tiny red dot pulsing like a heartbeat in the white wasteland. Impossible, he muttered. We glassed every continent. We vaporized their command centers. How could anything survive there? Perhaps they dug deep, Trell offered. Humans are persistent. Vrak remembered reports from early in the war, how human soldiers had fought in vacuum with ruptured suits, how their pilots had rammed Cathari cruisers when out of ammo, how their scientists had built weapons in basements while cities burned above them. They were not like other species. They did not break easily, but this felt different. Not desperation, not rage. This felt like calculation. Send a retrieval team, Vrak commanded. Full combat load. I want that bunker opened. I want every data core, every weapon, every living human inside brought to me, alive if possible. Yes. Commander, Trell replied, already relaying orders. As the team launched in a sleek dropship, Vrak remained on the bridge watching the red dot on the globe. The words echoed in his mind. You'll regret this fight. He had heard many last words from conquered species. Most were cries of fear or sorrow. None had ever sounded like a threat. Down on Earth, far from the ruins of Chicago, the wind howled across the frozen plains of Antarctica. Snow swirled around a smooth, unnatural mound of ice near the South Pole. Beneath it, in a chamber lit by flickering emergency lights, Frank Dawson wiped sweat from his brow and checked the final power coupling. Wires snaked across the floor, connecting jury-rigged consoles to a central core humming with unstable energy. Lisa Moore stood beside him, her fingers flying over a cracked tablet. Signal sent, she said quietly. They heard it. Frank nodded, his face grim under the dim light. He was in his late 40s with tired eyes and hands calloused from years of fixing things that weren't meant to be fixed. Good, now they'll come. They'll kill us, Lisa said, not as a question but as fact. Maybe, Frank replied. But they'll walk right into the trap while they're doing it. Around them, a dozen others moved with quiet purpose. Soldiers, engineers, medics, all that remained of Project Aegis. They had been chosen not for strength but for stubbornness, for the kind of quiet courage that doesn't shout, but endures. For 2 years they had lived underground, listening to the war end overhead. They had watched on grainy feeds as New York burned, as London vanished in a flash of plasma, as Mars fell silent. They had mourned in silence, then turned their grief into work. They scavenged alien tech from downed Cathari fighters that had crashed in the ice. They fused human engineering with stolen alien circuitry, and they built something new, something the Dominion had never seen coming. Frank walked to the main console and placed his hand on a red switch covered in dust. When they breach the outer door, he said to the room, we hold them as long as we can. Lisa, you stay with the core. Don't let them near it. Lisa gave a small nod. Her dark hair was tied back, her eyes sharp with focus. She wasn't a fighter, but she knew more about quantum resonance than anyone alive. If anyone could finish what they started, it was her. Outside, the Cathari dropship descended through the storm, its engines roaring like a beast. Ice cracked under its landing struts. Armored soldiers poured out, weapons raised, scanning the barren landscape. They found the entrance quickly, a reinforced hatch hidden under a false ice layer. Plasma cutters hissed as they began slicing through the metal. Inside, Frank loaded a makeshift rifle cobbled from alien parts and human ingenuity. He looked at his team. Remember why we're here, he said. Not to win. To make sure they never forget us. The first explosion rocked the outer corridor. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. The last humans on Earth braced themselves. And far above, aboard the Jarvok, Vrak waited, unaware that the silence he thought was victory was actually the calm before the storm. Beneath 2 kilometers of Antarctic ice, the air in Project Aegis was thick with tension and the low hum of overworked machinery. Frank Dawson crouched behind a reinforced bulkhead, his rifle resting on a sandbag barrier. The outer airlock had just been breached. He could hear the sharp hiss of plasma cutters and the heavy thud of armored boots on metal grating. The Cathari were inside. Lisa Moore stood at the central console, her fingers dancing across a flickering screen. Wires snaked from the walls into a humming core the size of a small car, its surface pulsing with a faint blue light. This was the heart of their plan, the resonance destabilizer. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a weapon meant to kill in the usual way. It was something quieter, deadlier, something that could unravel the very fabric of the Dominion's power. Frank, Lisa called, voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They're moving fast. I need 10 more minutes. Give me 5, Frank replied, not looking back. I'll hold them. He signaled to the others. 8 men and women in worn fatigues armed with whatever they could scavenge or build. Among them was Kyle, a former freighter pilot with a broken nose and steady hands, and Nora, a medic who'd once worked in a Mars colony hospital before it was glassed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They all knew what was at stake. The first Cathari soldier rounded the corner, its armored form towering over the human hallway. It raised its plasma rifle. Frank fired first. The shot, a modified pulse round fused with salvaged alien capacitors, ripped through the alien's chest plate. It staggered, green blood sprang, then collapsed. More followed. 3, then 5. Their movements were precise, disciplined, but the narrow corridors of Aegis worked against them. Humans had built this place for survival, not elegance. Every turn was a choke point. Every door could be sealed remotely. Nora tossed a smoke grenade down the hall. Thick gray fog rolled out, blinding the invaders. Kyle opened fire from a side alcove, his shots precise. 2 more Cathari fell, but they kept coming. Frank reloaded, his hands moving fast. He knew they couldn't win a long fight. They weren't supposed to. Their job was to delay, to bleed the enemy, to buy Lisa the time she needed. Inside the control room, Lisa typed furiously. She was syncing the destabilizer with hidden nodes scattered across the solar system, on the moon, in the asteroid belt, even aboard derelict human ships drifting near Neptune. All of them were dormant, waiting for this moment. The signal from Earth would wake them, but the sequence had to be perfect. One error and the cascade would fizzle out. A loud crash echoed from the east corridor. One of the blast doors had been blown open. Shouts followed, human shouts. Frank's stomach dropped. That was Ben's post. Ben didn't shout unless he was hurt. "Fall back to Sector Gamma," Frank ordered into his comm. Now, the team moved quickly, dragging wounded with them. Nora helped a limping soldier named Eli, his leg bleeding from shrapnel. They retreated through a narrow service tunnel, sealing doors behind them with manual overrides. The Cathari would cut through eventually, but every second counted. Back in the main chamber, Lisa didn't look up. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her screen showed a progress bar at 78%. Almost there. Frank entered the room, breathing hard. "How long?" "3 minutes," she said. "Maybe less." He nodded and turned to the others. "Set the charges on the north and south tunnels. We funnel them through the central hall. Make it hurt." Kyle and Nora moved without hesitation. They placed shaped explosives on key support beams, enough to collapse the ceiling if needed. It was a last resort. Once those charges blew, there'd be no escape. But escape was never the plan. Above them, the Cathari commander, Vrak, watched the feed from his soldiers' helmets. He saw humans fighting with crude weapons, using the terrain like traps. He saw desperation, yes, but also discipline. These were not refugees. These were soldiers who knew they were already dead. "Why did they resist?" he muttered to Trell, who stood beside him on the bridge of the Jarvok. "Their world is gone. Their species is finished." "Perhaps they do not believe that," Trell replied. Vrak frowned. He remembered the transmission. "You'll regret this fight." It wasn't a cry. It was a promise. Down in the ice, the final push began. The Cathari broke through the last barrier with a thunderous explosion. Smoke filled the hall. Frank and his team opened fire from behind the console banks. Plasma bolts scorched the walls. One soldier fell, Mira, the youngest of them, just 23. She didn't scream. She just stopped moving. Frank felt a hot rage rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Anger wouldn't help now. "Only focus, Lisa," he called. "Now." 92%, she said, eyes locked on the screen. "Almost there." A Cathari warrior lunged from the smoke, its blade flashing. Kyle met it head-on, firing point-blank into its face. Both went down in a tangle of limbs and sparks. Nora dragged Eli behind cover, pressing a bandage to his wound. "Stay with me," she whispered. Frank reloaded again. His rifle was overheating. So was his body. He was tired, so tired. But he stood. Then a soft chime. Lisa turned, her face pale but triumphant. "It's ready," Frank exhaled. "Do it." She pressed a final key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the core, the blue light flared bright, so bright it filled the room with cold radiance. A low vibration began, growing stronger, shaking the floor, the walls, the very ice above them. The Cathari soldiers froze. Their helmets flickered with warning alerts. Something was wrong. Something fundamental. Lisa grabbed a small data drive and shoved it into her pocket. The signal sent. All nodes are active. Frank looked at his team. Only 5 were left standing. Kyle, Nora, Eli himself, and Lisa. "We did it," he said. Outside, the Cathari began to retreat. Not in panic, but in confusion. Their comms were filled with static. Orders from the flagship were breaking up. Vrak stared at his display as red alerts bloomed across the star map. Hyperspace lanes near Proxima Centauri flickered and died. Then another near Sirius. Then another. "What is happening?" he demanded. No one answered. No one knew. Back in the bunker, Frank walked to the main console and activated the terminal. He typed a single line, then set it to loop on all open frequencies. "You'll regret this fight." He turned to Lisa. "Get to the escape pod." "There's no time," she said. "There's enough," he replied. "You have to go. Someone needs to tell the others it worked." Lisa hesitated, then nodded. She ran toward the rear shaft where a single pod waited. Small, old, but functional. Built for one, Frank watched her go. Then he turned back to the hallway where the last Cathari were regrouping. He raised his rifle. He wasn't leaving. Nora helped Eli to his feet. "What about you?" he asked her. She smiled faintly. "I stay with Frank." Kyle checked his ammo. "1 clip left." "Same." They stood together. 3 humans in a dying bunker facing an empire that thought it had won. Above them, the ice groaned. The destabilizer's hum grew louder, deeper, as if the planet itself was waking up. On the Jarvok, Vrak finally understood. The humans hadn't hidden to survive. They'd hidden to strike. And their strike wasn't aimed at his soldiers. It was aimed at everything. Lisa reached the pod and sealed the hatch. The engines whined to life. As it shot upward through a hidden launch tube, she looked down at the ice through a small viewport. She saw nothing but white. But she knew. The fight wasn't over, it had just begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Aboard the Cathari flagship, Jarvok, chaos spread like fire through dry grass. High Commander Vrak stood frozen before the star map, his claws digging into the edge of the console. Red warnings blinked across every sector. Hyperspace corridors, once stable, reliable, the backbone of the Dominion's empire, were collapsing. Not failing, not glitching, collapsing. Entire lanes winked out of existence, taking fleets with them. 3 armadas near Orion vanished mid-transit, swallowed by sudden gravitational shear. A supply convoy near Tau Ceti was torn apart as local spacetime twisted like crumpled paper. The network that held the Dominion together was unraveling, and no one knew why. Vrak turned sharply to Trell. "Find the source now." Trell's fingers flew over the controls, but his voice was tight with fear. "It's not one source, Commander. It's everywhere. The signal originated from Earth, but the effect is spreading through hidden nodes. Human-made. Buried in dead zones, abandoned stations, even derelict ships." Vrak's scales darkened to a stormy gray. "Impossible. We scanned every human outpost. We destroyed their fleets. There was nothing left." "Apparently," Trell said quietly, "we were wrong. On Earth, deep beneath the ice, the resonance destabilizer pulsed one final time before its core overloaded. Blue light flared, then died. The hum faded into silence. The bunker shook as ice cracked above. Frank Dawson didn't notice. He was reloading again, his hand steady despite the blood on his sleeve. Kyle was down, a plasma burn across his chest. Nora was tending to him, her face pale but focused. Eli leaned against a wall, rifle aimed at the hallway, breathing hard. They had done their part. The signal was out. The cascade had begun. Far beyond Earth, in the cold dark between stars. Other humans heard it too. On a hidden base buried under the red dust of Mars, Engineer Ray Cole stared at his monitor as the activation code scrolled across the screen. He didn't hesitate. He flipped the switch. Deep below the surface, a second destabilizer hummed to life. The hyperspace lane linking Mars to the inner colonies flickered and vanished. Near Jupiter's moon Europa, inside a sealed habitat built into the ice, pilot Dana Ruiz received the same signal on a loop. She'd been waiting for 2 years, living off algae tanks and hope. Now she entered the final sequence. The Jovian relay node activated. Another corridor collapsed. Even in the outer rim, aboard a drifting generation ship called the New Dawn, young technician Leo Hayes heard the words crackle through the ancient comms array. The ship had been adrift since the war began, its engines dead, its people surviving on rationed power. But they still had one weapon left, a prototype destabilizer hidden in the cargo bay. Leo, barely 19, activated it with trembling hands. The ship shuddered as energy surged through its frame. Light years away, a Cathari patrol fleet blinked out of existence. The humans hadn't just fought on Earth. They'd planted seeds of resistance across the galaxy. And now those seeds were blooming into ruin for the Dominion. Back on the Jarvok, Vrak watched as reports flooded in. A fleet near Alpha Centauri lost contact. A command station in the Pleiades went dark. Trade routes dissolved. Supply lines snapped. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion was blind, scattered, and afraid. "This is not war," Vrak whispered. "This is sabotage on a cosmic scale." He turned to his officers. "Order all fleets to return to core worlds. Secure the homeworlds. Shut down non-essential travel." But it was too late. The damage was spreading faster than orders could be sent. Ships that tried to jump found themselves torn apart by unstable space. Others arrived at destinations only to find no one waiting. Just silence and drifting debris. Meanwhile, Lisa's escape pod broke through the Antarctic ice and shot into the sky. The small craft trembled as it climbed through the atmosphere, its heat shield glowing red. Inside, she clutched the data drive like a lifeline. It held everything, the schematics, the activation logs, the proof that humanity had struck back not with fire, but with cunning. Her pod arced toward low orbit where a tiny, Cloaked shuttle waited in the shadow of a dead satellite. It was old, barely spaceworthy, but it had fuel and a working comms array. She docked with shaking hands and powered up the systems. Then she did something simple but powerful. She broadcast the same message on every open channel, repeating endlessly, "You'll regret this fight." The words rippled outward, not just as a threat, but as a signal to every hidden human outpost, every survivor, every rebel listening in the dark. It meant we're still here. Keep going. On Ganymede, a former Cathari prison camp held hundreds of human captives. When the guards' comms filled with panic and static, the prisoners saw their chance, led by a quiet man named Mara. They overpowered their captors using smuggled tools and sheer numbers. They seized the camp's comms tower and sent out a single word: free. In the asteroid belt, a group of miners who'd survived by hiding in hollowed-out rocks heard Lisa's broadcast. They armed their mining lasers and ambushed a stranded Cathari supply skiff. They took its weapons, its food, its data cores. Then they vanished back into the rocks, ready to strike again. Even species that had once fought alongside the Dominion began to question their loyalty. On the ocean world of Vexus, the native Lurians, once forced into servitude, rose up when their Cathari overseers lost contact with command. They used the chaos to seize control of their cities. Word spread the Dominion was weak, and the humans had made it so. Vrak felt the shift like a physical blow. His empire, built on fear and flawless coordination, was fracturing. Loyalty was turning to doubt. Order was turning to fear. He looked down at Earth on his view screen. The planet looked dead, silent. But he knew better now. Death didn't send warnings. Death didn't plan. Death didn't build weapons that could break the sky. Humans did, and they had done it from the grave. Lisa's shuttle drifted in orbit, its lights dim to avoid detection. She watched Earth below, the scars of war, the smoke, the ruins. But she also saw something else, hope, because the fight wasn't over. It had just changed shape. She opened a secure channel and began transmitting. The data drives contents to every known human. Frequency, coordinates, codes, instructions, a map of resistance. Somewhere out there, others would receive it. They would build. They would fight. They would remember. And the Dominion would learn too late that humanity's greatest weapon was never its ships or its guns. It was its refusal to stay dead. Vrak turned away from the view screen. He ordered the fleet to withdraw from Earth orbit, not because he feared the planet, but because he feared what it represented, a species that could lose everything and still win. As the Jarvok turned toward deep space, the last thing it received was the looping message, clear and calm, echoing through the void. "You'll regret this fight." And for the first time, Vrak believed it. The galaxy did not heal quickly, but it began to breathe again. In the months after the collapse of the hyperspace network, silence fell. Not the silence of death, but the quiet of a world holding its breath. The Cathari Dominion, once unshakable, now struggled to hold its pieces together. Fleets were stranded. Planets were cut off. Commanders argued over who was in charge. And in that confusion, something new grew. On a derelict freighter drifting near the icy rings of Saturn, Kyle Barnes sat in the dim glow of a cracked view screen. He wasn't supposed to be alive. He'd been left for dead in the Antarctic bunker. But Nora had dragged him into a secondary escape tunnel just before the ceiling collapsed. They'd made it to a hidden supply cache, then to a waiting shuttle. Now he floated in the dark, patching hull breaches with sealant foam and old duct tape. His chest still ached from the plasma burn, but he was alive, and that meant he had work to do. He tapped a key and his message began to broadcast on every open frequency. "We're still here, and we remember." It wasn't fancy. It wasn't loud. But it traveled. It reached miners on Ceres who'd been hiding in tunnels. It reached scavengers in the ruins of Luna. It reached even those who had once doubted humanity could survive. The message said one thing clearly: you are not alone. Far from Saturn, on the moon of Ganymede, Nora Ellis moved through a makeshift clinic built inside a repurposed Cathari barracks. The air smelled of antiseptic and burnt wiring. Around her, wounded humans and former prisoners rested on cots made of salvaged metal. Some were missing limbs. Others had radiation burns. But they were alive. And they were free. A young boy with wide eyes tugged at her sleeve. "Are the aliens coming back?" he asked. Nora knelt, her hands gentle. Maybe, she said. But we're ready now. She wasn't just a medic anymore. She was a leader. After the breakout from the prison camp, she'd helped organize the survivors, set up defenses, and share supplies. Word had spread that Ganymede was a safe zone, a place where humans helped each other no matter where they came from. Even a few non-humans had shown up. Lurians from Vexus, a pair of insectoid Zenthar who'd been forced to serve as laborers. They came seeking shelter, and Nora gave it. She remembered Frank's words. We don't win by being cruel. We win by being better. Back on Earth, the ruins still smoldered, but life returned in small ways. Rain washed ash from broken streets. Grass pushed through cracks in concrete. And in hidden corners, people emerged. A family in the mountains of Colorado lit a fire using old solar panels. A group of engineers in the remains of Houston jury-rigged a water purifier from scrap. They listened to the broadcasts, Lisa's calm voice, Kyle's steady message, and they knew they weren't forgotten. Lisa herself had landed on a small moon orbiting a quiet star far from Sol. It had no name, just coordinates. But it had air, water, and soil. With the help of a dozen survivors who'd rendezvoused there using old colony ship logs, she began to build. Not a weapon this time, a home. They planted seeds saved from Earth's seed vaults. They set up solar arrays. They taught children to read using tablets powered by hand cranks. And every night, they gathered to listen to the stars, hoping to hear more voices like theirs. The Cathari, meanwhile, were tearing themselves apart. Without fast travel, their empire became a collection of isolated outposts. Some commanders declared themselves kings of their own worlds. Others tried to rebuild the network. But every time they activated a jump gate, it collapsed within hours. The resonance destabilizers were still active, hidden and silent, waiting. The humans had not just broken the system, they had made it impossible to fix. Rumors spread among alien species that the humans had mastered space-time itself, that they could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before retaliation. It wasn't true, but it didn't need to be. Fear was enough. Former Dominion allies began to withdraw. Trade deals were canceled. Planets declared independence. The empire that had once spanned thousands of stars was shrinking, not from battle but from doubt. On a dusty world near the galactic rim, a Cathari patrol ship landed, low on fuel and hope. Its crew expected to find a loyal colony. Instead, they found humans waiting, armed, organized, and calm. The humans didn't attack. They offered water. They asked if the Cathari wanted to surrender. The aliens, exhausted and confused, laid down their weapons. They had heard the stories. They knew the war was over. They just hadn't realized it yet. Even among the Cathari themselves, whispers grew. Young warriors spoke of the humans not as pests, but as ghosts, beings who died and came back stronger. Old scholars dug through records, trying to understand how a species with such short lives and fragile bodies could outthink an empire that had lasted 10,000 years. They found no answer, only the echo of 5 words. You'll regret this fight. Nora stood on the roof of the Ganymede clinic one evening, looking up at Jupiter's swirling clouds. A ship approached, small, human-made, its hull patched with mismatched plates. It landed gently in the field below. Out stepped a woman with tired eyes and a data pad in hand. It was Lisa. They hugged without words. Then Nora said, "You made it." Lisa nodded. "So did you." Inside the clinic, children played with broken toys. Soldiers shared rations with former enemies. A Lurian hummed a soft tune while mending a torn blanket. This was not the victory they had dreamed of during the war. No grand parades, no cheering crowds. But it was real. It was quiet. And it was theirs. Kyle's message still played across the void, a steady heartbeat in the dark. More ships answered it every week. More voices joined the chorus. Humanity was scattered, yes, but it was not broken. It was rebuilding not just cities, but trust. Not just weapons, but hope. And somewhere, in the static between stars, the last transmission still echoed, not as a threat anymore, but as a promise. You'll regret this fight, because we never stop fighting for each other. High Commander Vrak stood alone on the observation deck of the Jar Vok, though the ship was no longer his. The bridge had been taken over by rival officers. The fleet was fractured. Even his own guards looked at him with doubt in their eyes. He stared at the view screen, not at stars or planets, but at a single looping message that had haunted him for months. You'll regret this fight. It played on every open channel, clean and calm, as if the humans were watching him from the dark. He had ordered one last strike, one final attempt to erase the source of his shame. The Cathari dropship had returned to Antarctica with twice the force, plasma cutters blazing, orders to level the ice and salt the earth beneath it. But when they reached the coordinates, there was nothing. No bunker, no signal, just a smooth crater where the ice had melted and refrozen, and in the center a single terminal, still powered, still repeating the same words. Vrak had watched the feed as his soldiers approached it. He saw their confusion. He saw the moment they realized they had been outplayed. The humans hadn't just hidden. They'd left a trap made of time and silence. And now, as his empire crumbled around him, he understood the truth. The fight was for about Earth. It was about belief, and humanity had never stopped believing. He gave the order to bombard the site anyway. Plasma fire rained down on the empty ice. It changed nothing. Back on the newly settled moon orbiting the quiet star HD 4307G, Lisa Moore walked through rows of young wheat swaying in the thin breeze. The soil was red, the sky pale orange, but the crops were growing. Children ran between the rows, laughing, their voices carrying across the open field. This place had no name yet. They called it Haven. Near the edge of the field, Nora Ellis sat on a low stone wall mending a torn jacket. She looked up as Lisa approached. The comms array picked up something new this morning, she said. Lisa sat beside her. What was it? A Cathari distress call. From a ship near Proxima. They're asking for help. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Did we answer? Nora nodded. Kyle sent coordinates for a safe rendezvous. Told them to drop weapons before approaching. Lisa smiled faintly. Good. They both knew the war wasn't truly over. Scattered Cathari warlords still fought. Rogue fleets hunted for human outposts. But the tide had turned. More and more former enemies came not to fight but to talk, to trade, to learn. Humanity had shown the galaxy that strength wasn't just in weapons, it was in mercy. In memory, in the will to build after everything was lost. That evening, a small group gathered around a fire outside the main habitat dome. Children sat cross-legged on woven mats, eyes wide with curiosity. Among them was a little girl named Ellie, no older than 6. She tugged at Nora's sleeve. Why did the aliens think they could beat us? She asked. Nora looked at Lisa, then at the faces around the fire. Human, Lurian, even a quiet Zenthar who now helped repair solar panels. She thought of Frank, Kyle, Ben, Mira, all the ones who didn't make it. She thought of the bunker under the ice, the last stand, the signal that changed everything. Because they forgot what we're made of, she said softly. Ellie frowned. What are we made of? Nora reached out and gently touched the girl's chest over her heart. Stubbornness, hope, and the kind of love that makes you fight for people you've never even met. The fire crackled. Above them, the stars shone bright and clear. No warships, no explosions, just peace, hard-won and fragile. Far away on a drifting Cathari vessel low on power and hope, a young alien technician listened to the looping human message one last time. He didn't hear a threat anymore. He heard a warning that had already come true. He powered down his weapons and opened a new channel. He sent a simple message. We surrender. On Ganymede, the clinic had grown into a town. On Mars, greenhouses bloomed under domes of recycled glass. On old freighters and hidden moons, humans taught each other how to fix engines, grow food, and tell stories. They were no longer just survivors. They were builders, guardians, a quiet force in a healing galaxy. And the last transmission still played. Not from Earth, for Earth was still scarred and silent, but from 100 hidden relays from ships, from stations, from hearts that refused to forget. You'll regret this fight. Not because humanity sought revenge, but because they never gave up. Not when their cities burned. Not when their fleets fell. Not even when the world went dark. They dug deep. They planned. They waited. And when the time came, they struck not to destroy but to free. Years later, historians would call it the Resonance Uprising. Poets would write of the ice stand. Children would learn the names of those who held the line in the frozen dark. But those who lived it knew the truth was simpler. It wasn't about glory. It was about saying no. No, you will not erase us. No, you will not break us. No, You will not make us forget who we are. And in the end, that was enough. Brack stepped away from the view screen. He removed his command insignia and placed it on the console. He walked out of the bridge without a word. No one stopped him. No one cared. The empire he had served was already a ghost. Somewhere in the void, a human ship sailed toward a new star. Its cargo hold carried seeds, books, and tools. Its crew carried memories and hope. And on its comms array, a single message repeated, not as a warning, but as a promise to the future. You'll regret this fight. Because we are still here. And we remember.